Hello everyone and welcome back to Commander in General, where in general, we talk about Commander. Well, we all saw the leaks and responded in one way or another. I know lots of people, especially veteran Magic the Gathering players, have an issue with Universes Beyond. And if that's how you feel, I get it. That's totally cool. I myself like to make these flavored theme decks around characters that I love that aren't in the world of Magic the Gathering, like with my Legend of Zelda theme deck and my in-progress Shovel Knight theme deck. Now, I know people don't want Magic to be the Fortnite of card games, but for me, the thing I love most about Magic is when flavor matches function. And I think that Universes Beyond provides such a cool opportunity to do that and fit the rules of the game around characters that we already love. However, half the sets next year are supposed to be Universes Beyond, and well, that's a lot. But I think that if you like Marvel, these are really cool cards that are really wonderfully flavored and I think faithfully recreate the abilities of the characters. But with all that said, I know the other side of the argument. More Universes Beyond, as we've seen, has led to less and less of the original Magic stories, and that's no fun either. The other controversy around all this, I guess, is that these cards have been really difficult to actually even obtain since they were sold exclusively through secret layers and are now sold in limited quantities. Now, as a major proxy advocate myself, I think these will be really cool to play with, but it does suck that for people who it really matters to, that they might not have the option to ever actually hold their favorite character's card in person without shilling out an arm and a leg. But enough about what I think. I'm just a disembodied voice stuck here in the infinite, unending white space. Those fucking colorful dots. What are you doing down there? Stop repeating like that. What does that mean? I don't trust you! But I want to hear from all you. What do you think about all the Universes Beyond cards, and what do you think about the new announced sets for 2025? But with the drama out of the way, let me just say the usual. If you want to support this channel, please consider leaving a like and subscribing if you like the content. Now, let's take a look at Wolverine Best There Is. Wolverine Best There Is costs 1 colorless, 1 red, and 1 green for a 2/2 legendary creature, mutant, berserker, hero, whose text box starts with the ability Unrivaled Lethality, which reads, double all damage Wolverine would deal. Excuse me. Pardon me. Come again. Just one moment. What? Okay, that seems pretty darn good, and there's still more text on this card, my sources are telling me. Do not ask about my sources. I'm doing my own research. At the beginning of each end step, if Wolverine dealt damage to another creature this turn, put a 1/1 counter on him. So he's going to continue to get bigger turn after turn, and you can bet we're going to implement some tools to pump those numbers up a bit and make sure Wolverine is an absolute beast by the end of the game. Well, maybe not quite that beast. So obviously with us trying to build Wolverine up with a ton of counters, we're going to need tons of protection built in so we don't lose all those counters. Sir? What's that? Oh, the protection is already built in on the card. And he's only a 3 mana drop and he has 3 abilities and the power creep is out of control and magic is dead. No, no, understood. You know what? I'll see myself out. I'll see myself out. Well, once again, our flavor matches our function. Wolverine has regenerate, because of course he does. That's what he do. But all jokes aside, Wolverine is a deadly force on the table. We're gonna make sure our opponents know it. Alright, so what's the strategy, bub? So kind of you to ask, Logan. Well, firstly, we're going to build in tons of fighting cards and bite cards to deal damage to creatures not only on our own turns, but ideally on everyone else's as well, so we can keep stacking up those counters. We're gonna take that damage multiplier and maybe add a few more multipliers in there as well. Why the heck not? We're also gonna put in a few more creatures that also benefit from a bunch of counters in the unfortunate scenario that Wolverine gets the Logan treatment. Spoiler warning, Yes. And despite my earlier comments, we are going to build in a bit of protection, just to be safe. After all, people are constantly trying to kill this guy. And then I think we've also got some pretty unique ramp, removal, and card draw options for this deck. Now remember, the way I do decks is I like to throw out a lot of options for cards that work well, and ultimately you can throw together what suits your style. But if you want to see my final build, I'll be linking the deck list on my Architect down in the description below, and it has all the cards in my maybe board that you might like more than what I ended up with. So strap in, let's get started with our first category, 1/1 counters. So Wolverine is already sniffing out those counters on his own pretty easily, but we want to pump up those numbers like the jacked man himself. And I'm really excited about a lot of these options, especially considering I don't really typically play a lot of 1/1 counter decks. It's just a lot to track, it's not really my style. But a fairly new one I've had my eye on is... Bristly Bill. Early game, this card is going to give us a few extra counters whenever we play a land. This is especially good with lands like Wooded Foothills, Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, and Fabled Passage. So you can throw in a few more fetches if you'd like. And while I'm on the topic, lands like Oran-Reef the Vastwood, Karn's Bastion are also great options to bolster the 1/1 counter strategy. Bolster, get it? With the 1/1 counters? Sorry, I'm new here. Late game, Bill also has the ability of doubling the number of 1/1 counters on each creature you control, which is bonkers. I think he would probably make a pretty fun commander on his own, actually. And staying with the Thunder Junction cards, we've got Trash the Town, which is a modal card with Spree. So we can choose more effects by paying a bit more mana. We can add counters, give our creature trample, which is going to be really useful once we have more counters. And then the last ability takes advantage of this by making it so that this turn, when our creature deals damage, we draw a few cards. I think this card is pretty sweet and fits into a bunch of categories we care about. Actually, looking into this deck, I was running into a lot of modal options that fit perfectly into multiple categories we're looking for. And I'm gonna go over some of them right now, and it's kind of gonna mess up a lot of the categories for the rest of the deck tech, but you know, they just fit into so many different places. I just want to get them out of the way. Starting off with Archdruid's Charm, which gives us a tutor for a land or creature, a 1/1 counter / bite effect, plus some artifact or enchantment removal. Inscription of Abundance gives us counters, some life gain, plus it's a fight spell. Seasons of Gathering is one I'm pretty excited about, though it is a bit more of an expensive option. It has this paw print season mechanic, which is a little confusing, but basically it sort of has this little shot where you get a certain amount of paws to spend on different abilities, and this one has the option of spending them on a 1/1 counter, Vigilance, and Trample, a board wipe for exclusively artifacts or enchantments, your choice, which I think is pretty unique and you might be really thankful to have in a pinch. And lastly, you get the Wild Speaker effect of drawing cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Then there is the actual Return of the Wild Speaker, which draws us a few cards and buffs up our non-human team, which, by the way, it's a small thing, but I do appreciate that Wolverine is a mutant and not a human. But wait, there's more. Bridgeworks Battle is an MDFC that is a land on one side and a buff / fight spell on the other side. Bushwhack fetches us a land or is a fight spell. Collective Resistance is an instant with Escalate that can either destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or be some of that all-important protection with Hexproof and Indestructible. Okay, but that is most of them. I know I threw this whole deck tech out of whack to get over those at the beginning, but it's just awesome to have all these cards that fill multiple roles for us. And there are definitely more coming that fill multiple roles, but maybe not so explicitly. But anyways, a million years ago, I'm pretty sure we were talking about 1/1 counters, so let's get back to it with a card like Court of Garenbrig. Personally, I love the Monarch mechanic in general, and I think that if this just sits here, we draw that first card off the Monarch, and then never become the Monarch again, collecting 2 1/1 counters every turn ain't bad. But in the case we do get to double those counters...
Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here.
And as we've seen with the effects on... This isn't the only card with this type of effect. We also have options like Hydra's Growth, which does it continuously for us on each of our turns, and Invigorating Surge, which can do it at instant speed, which could be a truly devastating combat trick for us. As a quick aside, a few other combat tricks I am running are Psychic Fury and Temur Battle Rage, because I think with the double damage, it's just so worth trying to sneak in a one-shot on someone at instant speed. But you can also telegraph this a bit more with other damage multipliers like Fiery Emancipation, which we all know is nuts, and Civil Unrest, which gives us not only double damage, but a fantastic ability, Riot. And lastly, if we really want to lay on those counters, we can play cards like Power Fist that let us add counters equal to the damage we deal to a player with the equipped creature, or play the new card from Foundation, Quilled Greatworm, and give this effect to each of our creatures. Except on Quilled Greatworm, this combat damage doesn't have to be just to players. Plus, we can play it again from our graveyard by removing 6 counters from other creatures. I'll also throw Vigor in here too, who rather than from doing damage, protects our creatures and gives us counters when they would take damage instead. This type of effect can also be seen for much cheaper on the enchantment card Rite of Passage, but the advantage to Vigor is also that you get a big trampling creature to slap those counters on, so weigh your options. And lastly, Lastly, I just wanted to tack on what I'll call counter supports or synergies with cards like Hardened Scales and Ozolith the Shattered Spire, which increase the amount of counters we get from each instance. I also like as a semi-protective, semi-aggressive equipment, Sword of Truth and Justice, which gives us that stat buff, pro blue and white, and then on combat damage, we get that counter, and we get to proliferate. As well, there are enchantments like Branching Evolution and obviously Doubling Season, which double the amount of counters instead. The actual Ozolith is an option as well, but I feel like it doesn't usually come in handy like I think it's going to. What do you guys think about it? Is it worth it? If you are going to play it, at least they came out with that cool new Wolverine version. Now with all these counters, yes, we're going to put them on Wolverine. Maybe we even win with commander damage. But building around only one card is way too volatile. We always want to build in some redundancies. In this deck, this means building in some other cards that benefit from having lots of counters on them, and would be alright at fighting other creatures. So let's start small. One option I really like is Lizard Blades. While it's a creature, it has double strike, so you can really capitalize on all those counters and turn them into big damage. But it also gives us the versatility to switch this onto another creature that's already been built up with counters. A Talon Jackal is an actually pretty sweet little 2/2 for 3 mana that comes with Trample on its own, which is going to be an important ingredient if we don't want our massive creatures just to get chump blocked. It's also got haste, plus when it lands a hit, it ramps us a tapped land. Helena and Elena are another really good place for our counters, because they just turn them into more counters for another creature. Plus they give them haste. Additionally, they have first strike and reach, which makes them both great attackers and blockers. Managorger Hydra is good because it's slowly going to build itself up over time. It comes down to just 3 mana, and then it's also got that all-important trample. I think the trample is actually going to be so important for us that sprinkling in a few lands like Kessig Wolfrun, Skarg the Rage Pits, or just Rogue's Passage isn't a bad idea. Champion of Lambhold, should it get big enough, makes it so our creatures can't be blocked by our opponents. So definitely a great place for those counters. Now I'm going to take a little break to talk about our ramp. This is because by having a bit of our ramp on creatures in this deck, we can have a few more options for creatures to put these counters on. So cards like Goblin Electromancer are pretty generically good, but when we get into some with a little bit of evasion, like Birds of Paradise or Ornithopter of Paradise, these counters become that much more threatening. Biophagist gives the creature it casts a little boost when we use it to cast them. And then options like Kami of Whispered Hopes and Incubation Druid actually give us more mana once they have some counters on them. Kami of Whispered Hopes also giving us that extra 1/1 counter each time we would get one. And lastly, we've got Kodama of the West Tree, which is a decent body itself, but also giving our modified creatures trample, of which there should be many, and also letting us look for lands when a modified creature connects with an opponent, which is just too sweet. And then for the rest of the ramp, I just added some mana rocks. But one fantastic one I'm sure people already know is Great Henge. Hopefully we'll be able to cast it for really cheap. It's gonna give us some mana, some life, plus it draws us cards and gives counters. It just does it all. But we're not quite done with creatures to put counters on. A few funny ones we've got here are Brash Taunter and straight out of Toy Story, Giggling Skitterspike. Both of these are cool options because they have indestructible, so they become much harder to deal with, and then they both have these types of effects where when something triggers them, they deal damage equal to their power to an opponent, or in the case of Skitterspike, each opponent. For the Taunter, it's whenever it's dealt damage, and it makes it easy to pull off with the second ability where they can fight another creature. The Skitterspike activates when it attacks, blocks, or becomes the target of a spell or ability, which is pretty crazy, especially when you consider that if you had these both out, you could have Brash Taunter fight the Skitterspike, which is just truly diabolical. Skitterspike also has that monstrosity ability, which I'm happy to see return. Indestructible creatures in general are a great option to put counters on, but they still have to make sense. I think personally Toski is pretty good. If it draws us even a few cards, that's pretty great, plus it's going to be a great attacker for us. And speaking of indestructible, let's talk about protection. You guys tell me what you think. Wolverine has regenerate, but is that enough? Is that really what we want to spend our mana on? Because that is something we'll constantly be having to leave our mana up for just in case. The way I'm thinking I'd like to take this category is twofold. One, I want to add a few indestructible options of his own, like Mithril Coat and Darksteel Plate, or maybe Anara, Woven Familiar. That way we just turn that into a one-time cost and we can be done with it. And two, if we're going to be keeping the mana up, I want it to do a little more for us. Like sure, Heroic Intervention is a good option, but also, Silk Guard puts those much needed counters on our creature, and also gives our modified creatures hexproof, which could come in clutch. Snakeskin Veil does a very similar thing, but for just one creature, and Overprotect and Tyvar Stand can be combat tricks in a cinch, but also give us that indestructible and hexproof. But you let me know, am I being overprotective? For now, let's get to what Wolverine does best, fighting. So we looked at a few cards already in the modal section section, but we've still got more. One category of fight spell that I like is the ones that are really low to the ground, instant speed, and then any other bonus is just gravy. So Mutant's Prey is a fantastic option for 1 mana. It just requires us to have a creature that already has a 1/1 counter on it. And same goes for Titanic Brawl, although it's a bit more versatile. Stepping up to 2 mana, Prize Fight gives us a treasure bonus, while Ancient Animus actually gives us a 1/1 counter. And then recurable options like Uvenwall Tracker can let us initiate a fight once per round at the table. And this next option I think is just really cool. It's Gimli's Reckless Might. So firstly, this is an enchantment that is going to give all of our creatures haste, which is nice. But it also has this formidable clause that says if all of our creatures' power totals up to 8 or more, then when we attack, we can have one of our creatures fight a creature we don't control. So this is a recurable option for each of our turns. The other haste enabler I like in this deck is Rhythm of the Wild, because if we don't need the haste, we just get another counter instead. Now because we're going to need to be fighting a lot, we're going to need for our opponents to have creatures to fight anyways. So I didn't find it super necessary to run a lot more creature removal than we already had, but I did run a few pseudo board wipes like Chandra's Ignition, Waltz of Rage, and Arcbound, as well as Blasphemous Act. But back to the fighting. Now you see, I love fight spells as much as the next guy. They're dank, they're dope, and frankly, they're fly as hell. However, they are risky, and heroes don't take risks, and neither do mutants, or Wolverines. That's why we have bite spells instead. What's a bite spell, you may ask? Well, it's basically the exact same, but different. The Magic the Gathering wiki defines it as biting, also called one-sided fight or punch, from Sucker Punch, is the slang name for a creature mechanic functionally defined as target creature deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. You can think of the spell Rabid Bite for reference, but the main takeaway is that our creature doesn't take damage. They just dish it out. My criteria for these was similar. It needed to either be instant speed, give us something a little bit extra, or both. So cards like Cosmic Hunger, Soul's Fire, and Stump Stomp fit this category nicely. Stump Stomp also being a land on the other side, which could come in handy. And our versions with a little extra are Ram Through, which lets the extra damage trample over, which could be nice for a little 2-for-1, and Beastie Beatdown, which can give a creature some extra counters. Contest of Claws is actually a really cool one, especially with Wolverine doubling our damage. It says that if excess damage would be dealt this way, we discover X, where X is the excess damage, which is a really cool effect pairing. And lastly, I have the card that made me want to build this deck in the first place, Burning Anger. Time to reveal my devastating secret. My original plan for this deck was to play all cards like Burning Anger that were recurable effects we could be using each turn, like Lightning Prowess, Power of Fire, Dizzying Gaze, and Predatory Urge. Then I was going to play a bunch of these untapper effects like Seedborn Muse, Legolas's Quick Reflexes, Sereth the Viper's Fangs, along with some combat untappers like Seize the Day, Ansrag, Karlach, and one I'm really excited about that actually did make the cut for my final deck, Aki Battle Squad. I was also just going to try and abuse the card Well Rested, but alas. After putting all the work into finding all the cards and putting them together, yeah, I was getting lots of counters, it seemed like, but the strategy just didn't feel like it was reaching the potential of what I wanted this deck to do. The jank just didn't fall into place, and that's alright. Jank will do that. So I left some of the elements in my final build, but for the most part I went in another direction. But if one of y'all figure out that build, hit me up. I want to see it. As for now, we go forward to card draw. Firstly, a duo of card draw creatures. The first one being Dragonborn Champion, another good low to the ground trampler with the upside of drawing us a few cards. And Nayeth of the Dire Hunt, who is also a fantastic fight commander because they draw us a card every single time we fight. They also have this second ability that says at the beginning of combat on our turn, we may pay 2 and either a red or a green. If we do, double target creature's power until end of turn. That creature must be blocked as combat if able. So both two effects I think we really benefit from having in this deck. Next, a few enchantment options. We've got 2 from Bloomburrow that are just awesome. Firstly, a green enchantment coming in all the way at 1 mana. We have Stocking the Pantry, which flavor-wise I just love, chef's kiss, but also I think this could just draw us a ridiculous amount of cards. We put a supply counter on it whenever we put 1 or more counters on a creature. Then, for a measly 2 mana later on, we can remove a counter and draw a card. Now I think that the rate on this is fine when you consider how easy it is for us to get the counters and how available the card draw is going to be. The second enchantment at the other end of the mana spectrum, up at 5 mana, is Thickest of the Thicket. Great job naming that one, Wizards. Firstly, when it enters, we effectively double a creature's power with 1/1 counters. Then, on our end step, we draw 2 whole cards if we control the creature with the greatest power, if we truly are the double C thickest in the thicket. And lastly, we have some instant and sorcery card draw. Keep in mind that the modal section screwed this all up, so there is more cards in the card draw category. Anyways, we have Hunter's Insight, which lets us choose a creature we control, and when that creature deals damage this turn, we get to draw that many cards, which on the low end, I think is fine if it's like 3, but I think on the high end it's going to be pretty high. And in the same kind of vein, we have Soul's Majesty, which lets us draw cards equal to the power of a creature we control, and Rishkar's Expertise, which does the same thing, but also lets us cheat out something that's 5 mana or lower. But that does bring us to the end. So, X-Men, women, and NBs, how did I do? Did I convince you to build a deck of your own? Because I sure did convince me. I always seem to be doing that. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a big ol' lick down below. Just get all freaking slobbery down there. And subscribe if you haven't already. And let me know what you think of these new Marvel decks. You like them? You don't? Universes Beyond? Or hard pass? I reply to all my comments, so let me know. This is likely going to be my last video of the year, so thank you all again so much. It's been such an amazing year, and I'm looking forward to 2025. This has been Commander in General, and I will see you all in the new year. Peace.